She had nothing but her body to offer, and the cowboy still let the frozen Apache woman in. The snow had been coming down since before dark, and I was already inside with the lamp low and a cup of coffee going cold on the table when I heard something hit the porch boards. Not a knock, a fall. I sat there a moment with my hand around the cup. Animals don't hit a porch like that. That's dead weight, something that had been moving and stopped. I pulled on my boots without lacing them and took the rifle off the hook, not because I thought I'd need it, but because reaching for it was habit, and I opened the door. She was on her side in the snow that had drifted up onto the boards, her knees pulled up, her arms wrapped around herself. Dark hair plastered across her face. She had a blanket over her shoulders, but it was soaked through and doing nothing. Skin the color of creek clay. Her lips had gone past blue into something quieter, something that made my stomach drop. I looked out at the dark past the porch rail. Nothing. Snow and pine and the far-off shape of the ridge. No horse, no tracks I could read in that light, just her. I set the rifle against the wall and crouched down and put my hand to her face. Cold. Cold as the board she was laying on. "Hey," I said. "Nothing." I got my arms under her and stood up. She weighed less than I expected, which was not a good sign. A person that size ought to have more to them. I had the place to myself going on 6 years by then. Not by any design I could point to, it had just worked out that way. My wife Alina had died of fever in the spring of '79, and after that I'd let the hands go one by one. Not from any grief I was performing, but because I didn't need them and didn't particularly want other people's voices filling rooms that had gotten used to quiet. I ran about 200 head on my own, did what needed doing, let the rest go to brush. The house was clean enough. I kept a garden in summer and put up what I could, and bought the rest at the mercantile in town every few weeks. Calhoun Station was 11 miles northeast. I didn't go there much more than I had to. I wasn't unhappy. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't misery I was living in, it was just a certain narrowing. A man alone on a place like mine, the days get to running together in a way that isn't unpleasant so much as it is just flat. You do the work and the work does you back, and at the end of it you've gone nowhere and come from nowhere, and tomorrow will be the same. I had stopped expecting it to be different. That wasn't grief. It was just what the shape of things had settled into. I got her onto the cot in the back room, the room I'd never quite gotten around to using for anything. I stripped the wet blanket off her and the dress under it, which was thin cotton and soaked and no warmer than the blanket, and I covered her with every dry thing I had: 2 wool blankets from the chest, a buffalo robe I hadn't touched in years, my own coat over that. Got a fire going in the small stove in the corner, pulled the chair over and sat. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. I watched her chest for a while to be sure. Up close now in the lamp and the first hint of firelight, she was young, maybe late 20s, high flat cheekbones, a broad forehead. Something in the way she was built said Apache to me, or part Apache. She had some Anglo in her somewhere, I thought, though I couldn't have said where I was reading that from. A scar on her chin, thin and old, the kind you get from a fall as a child. Her hands were rough. She'd worked hard in her life. I didn't know what she'd been running from, or toward, or whether she'd been turned out or gotten lost. None of that was my business yet. She was alive, barely, and she was in my house, and those 2 things were enough to go on for now. I sat there until the room came up to a temperature that felt right. Then I went and finished the coffee. She was awake the next morning, which surprised me. I'd half expected to go back in there and find her gone, not run off, but gone the other way. Instead, she was sitting up with the blankets pulled around her shoulders, looking at the wall, and when I came through the door she looked at me. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me the way a person looks at something they're trying to figure out, not afraid, not grateful, just reading me. "You hungry?" I said. She didn't say anything. I went to the kitchen and came back with bread and a piece of salt pork and a cup of water. set it on the floor beside the cot. She watched me do all of it. I pulled the chair back and sat down. After a minute, she picked up the bread and ate it. Not quickly, steadily. She drank the water without taking her eyes off me, and when she was done, she set the cup on the floor beside the plate and pulled the blankets back up. "I'm not going to put you out in the snow," I said. She didn't say anything to that either. "My name is Harlan Cole," I said. "This is my place, you're safe here." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Sunka." I didn't know that word. "Is that your name?" She seemed to consider something. "My father called me Margaret," she said. Her English was careful and a little formal, the way a person talks when they learned it as a second tongue. "Margaret," I said. "All right." She looked at the stove. The fire was still going. "You did not have to bring me in," she said. "No," I said. She seemed to be waiting for me to explain why I had. I didn't have a clean answer for that, so I didn't give one. I just stood up and took her plate and told her I'd have something hot ready in an hour and went out and shut the door. I want to tell you what I thought about those first few days, but the honest answer is that I mostly didn't think. I did. That's how I've always worked through a thing, not by sitting down and reasoning it out, but by finding what needs doing and doing it, and letting the situation tell me what it is in its own time. She had frostbite on 2 toes of her right foot and 3 fingers of her left hand. Not bad enough to take anything, but bad enough that she couldn't walk well for nearly 2 weeks and couldn't grip much with that hand. I changed the dressings. She didn't complain and she didn't thank me, and she watched everything I did with those same dark, careful eyes. By the 3rd day, she was eating at the table with me. By the 5th, she was asking where things were kept, the flour, the salt, the matches. I told her. That afternoon, I came in from checking on the cattle, and there was a pot of something on the stove that smelled like nothing I'd put together myself. She'd found dried chilies I'd had tucked back in a corner of the pantry for 2 years and hadn't used, and some dried corn, and she'd made something with the salt pork that was, plainly, better than anything I'd cooked in those 6 years. She was sitting at the table when I came in, mending a tear in the hem of her dress. She'd put it back on when it dried. It was the only thing she had, and she looked up when I stood there at the pot. "You cook," I said. "Everyone cooks," she said. I got a bowl and sat down and ate it, and she watched me the way she watched everything, steady and measuring. "That's good," I said. She looked back at her mending. "I know." On the 9th day, I went to town for supplies. I left before first light, and I didn't ask her if she'd be there when I got back. I wasn't going to put that kind of pressure on a thing that didn't have any obligation to me. She was here because she'd nearly died in my yard, not because of any arrangement. But I'll tell you what I did. At the dry goods, I asked after a woman's coat, something practical. Calhoun had a small pile of women's things in the back, left over or traded in. He was that kind of store. I found a canvas coat lined with wool, a dark brown, good quality, and I bought it. Didn't say who it was for. He didn't ask. I got back around mid-afternoon. The horse was in the barn, brushed down and watered, not by me. She was inside with a fire going, and the table already cleared to make room for the supplies, like she'd known I was coming back with some. She looked at the coat when I set it on the table. I said, "That dress isn't going to hold through a winter up here." She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and held it against herself, checking the fit. "It's good," she said. She put it on. It fit well enough, maybe a little big across the shoulders, and she turned up the collar and looked out the window at the snow coming down on the porch and the yard. She said without turning, "Why did you do that?" Not a question exactly, more like she was thinking out loud, asking herself. I said, "You needed a coat." She was quiet a moment. Then she turned around and looked at me, and it was a different kind of looking than before, not measuring me anymore, but seeing me. And the two things are different in a way I can't quite put words to except to say one of them reaches further. "You are a strange man, Harlan Cole," she said. Probably, I said. I'll tell you what I was if you want the plain version. I was 53 years old and I'd had one wife and buried her, and I'd been alone 6 years, and I had 200 cattle and a house that was clean but quiet in a way that had stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling just empty. I was not a man who inspired much notice. People in Calhoun Station knew me, knew I ran the coal place, knew I kept to myself. I paid my accounts. I didn't drink badly. I wasn't unkind. I was just not much considered. You know the type. The man who's been by himself long enough that people stop picturing him having anything but solitude. I had stopped thinking about it one way or another. That was the truth of it. I didn't know what Margaret's story was. I didn't push for it. It came out in pieces over those winter weeks, the way a person gives you things when they've decided you're worth giving them to, not all at once but bit by bit, like laying out cards one at a time on a table. Her mother had been Apache, Chiricahua. Her father had been an Anglo rancher down in the New Mexico territory, not a bad man, she said, but not one who'd known what to do with a half-blood daughter after her mother died. He'd done what he could, taught her English, taught her to read some, let her work alongside the hands. But when he died, there was a son from a different woman, a full-blood Anglo son, and that son had made clear that Margaret had no place on that land. She'd gone north with a man she'd thought was decent. He wasn't. She'd ended up on foot in the snow 11 miles from my house, in the middle of a storm, with a soaked blanket and no horse. She told me that last part the same way she told the rest of it, flat and even, like she was describing weather. No self-pity in it, just the facts of what had happened. I listened and didn't say anything wise or soft about it, because there wasn't anything wise or soft to say. It had happened. She was here now. Those were the facts. "The man," I said. "He coming after you." She looked at me. "I don't think so," she said. "I think he is glad to be rid of me." "All right," I said, "then that's settled." She looked at me for a moment. "You believe me," she said. "Of course I believe you," I said. She looked back at her hands, which were wrapped around her coffee cup. Something moved through her face that I couldn't name exactly, not relief, not emotion exactly, just a kind of settling. "Not everyone does," she said, "when a woman like me says a thing like that." I didn't say anything to that. I just picked up my own cup and we sat there in the quiet of the kitchen, and the snow came down outside and the stove ticked. By February she had taken over the cooking entirely, and I had stopped arguing about it because the food was better, and she seemed to want the work. She also started in on some repairs I'd been putting off, a split rail in the west fence that I'd been meaning to get to since October, a gap in the chicken coop roof. She did the fence herself while I was moving cattle to the south pasture, and when I came back and saw it, I stood there looking at it for a good minute. She'd spliced it cleaner than I would have. "You know fencing," I said. "My father's place had 3 miles of it," she said. She didn't brag about it and she didn't make a point of it. She'd seen it needed doing and she'd done it. I had a neighbor, Rupert Baines, whose place was 4 miles east of mine. He came by in late February to borrow a post-hole digger, and Margaret was in the yard splitting wood when he rode up. He looked at her a long time and didn't say much, and when he was leaving he said to me, low, the way men say things they don't want a woman to hear, "That's trouble, Cole." I said, "How do you figure?" He shrugged, said the town wouldn't like it, said mixed blood was complicated, said he was just telling me what he knew. I said, "I appreciate you coming for the digger," and went back inside. I told Margaret about it later because she had a right to know. She listened with her usual stillness. She said, "Does it worry you, what they say in town?" I thought about that for a real moment, not just a polite pause but an actual thinking through. "No," I said. She looked at me, "Not at all." "What they say doesn't change what's true," I said. "And what's true is that you work hard and you're square with me and the food is better. I don't see what the town has to do with any of that." She was quiet for a while. The lamp was burning low between us on the table. She had her hands around her cup. "You're not like other men I've known," she said. I wasn't sure what to do with that, so I just nodded, and we finished the evening in quiet. Spring came slow that year, which is how it usually comes up in that country. Not a clean break, but a series of negotiations. A warm day and then a cold week, and then 2 warm ones and then a frost. By the time the ground was truly soft, and the cattle were back on grass, Margaret and I had been living under the same roof for 3.5 months. We hadn't spoken about what it was exactly. I don't know that either of us knew. I knew what I felt, a warmth when she came into a room, a particular attention I paid to her, a way my day organized itself around whether she was nearby or not. But I didn't have a name for what was proper or what she'd want, and I wasn't going to push a woman who'd already been pushed by more than one man in her life. She brought it up herself, which I could have predicted if I'd been paying better attention, because she was always the one to say the direct thing while I circled it. It was an evening in late April. We'd eaten, the dishes were done, and we were sitting on the porch watching the last light go off the ridge. She said, without preamble, "What are we doing here, Harlan?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean you and me. What is this?" I sat with that for a moment. "I don't know what you want it to be," I said. She turned and looked at me. The light was going and her face was half in shadow and half in the last of the day's gold. "I want to know what you want," she said. "Not what you think I need or what is proper, what you want." I didn't hedge it. I was 53 years old and I'd hedged enough things in my life. "I want you to stay," I said, "not out of obligation. I want you here because this place is better with you in it, and I'm better with you in it, and I've been alone a long time, and I hadn't thought about wanting anything again until you ended up on my porch." She looked at me for a long time, not measuring, seeing. Then she said, "I don't have anything to give you. I came here with nothing. I have no money, no family, no land." I said, "I didn't ask you for any of those things." She said, "I know. That's why I'm telling you yes. I want to tell you about the morning she went to town with me for the first time. I want to tell you about it because it's the one that matters, the one that showed me what kind of man I'd been taken for and what kind I was." It was a Wednesday in May. I needed lumber and a new draw knife and some seed corn, and she said she'd come. She'd been putting it off. I knew she'd been putting it off. I'd seen her track it in her mind every time I'd gone alone, and I hadn't pushed because she had her reasons. But she decided, and I wasn't going to say a word except good morning. She wore the canvas coat and her hair was braided, and she sat straight on the seat of the wagon and I drove, and we were quiet most of the way, which was how we were most comfortable. Calhoun Station was not a large town. A main street with a dozen buildings on it, 2 saloons, a church, the Mercantile, a feed store, a small hotel. On a Wednesday morning there were maybe 30 people going about their business. I pulled the wagon up in front of the Mercantile, and we got down. People looked. I won't pretend they didn't. A man I knew slightly, Dawes, who ran the hotel, looked at Margaret and then at me with a face I didn't like. A pair of women on the far boardwalk stopped talking and watched us go in. Inside, Calhoun himself was behind the counter. He looked at Margaret and then at me, and I watched him decide something, and he came around the counter and said, "Cole, I got your draw knife in just last week. Let me pull it out." And that was that. I gave him my list. He filled it. Margaret walked the store, and I watched 2 or 3 people in there look at her and look away and look again, and she paid them no more mind than she would have paid whether. At the seed display, she stopped and picked up a packet of something and brought it over. "Squash," she said. "The kind my mother grew. Can we get some?" I added it to the list. Going out with the lumber and the seed, Dawes was on the boardwalk again. He said, "Cole, that your woman?" I looked at him. I wasn't trying to be hard about it. I was just answering plain. "Yes," I said. He looked at Margaret and then back at me, and something shifted in his face, not warmth, not approval, just the recognition of a fact. "All right then," he said and moved on. I put the lumber in the wagon. Margaret climbed up on the seat and sat and waited, and I went around to my side and got up and took the reins, and we started out of town. After a mile she said, "You said yes." "Yes," I said. She was looking at the road. "You didn't hesitate." "There was nothing to hesitate about," I said. She was quiet another minute. Then she put her hand on my arm, and I felt the weight of it through my sleeve, and neither of us said anything else the whole way home. You want to know what the town thought eventually? I'll tell you. They didn't all come around. Dawes, I just told you about, he went neutral, which was fine by me. Rupert Baines never did like the arrangement, though he was civil enough when he had to be. There were women in the church who wouldn't speak to Margaret, and she didn't lose any sleep over it. But some things shifted. The way these things shift when people see enough of something to have to deal with what's actually true. There was a family, the Kowalski family, Polish immigrants who'd come out the year before and were trying to make a go of a small claim about 6 miles south of me. Hard-working people, Henrik and his wife Marta and their 3 children, but they didn't know the land and they'd made some mistakes early on, and they were in trouble by July. Their south fence had been washed out in the spring runoff, and they'd lost most of their cattle, and they were looking at a winter with not enough put by. I went and helped with the fence. I did that because it was the right thing, and also because I would have wanted someone to come if it were me. Margaret came with me. She brought food, 3 days' worth for their whole family, and she worked alongside Marta without any fuss. And those 2 women who couldn't share a language found a way to talk in that manner women sometimes find. And by the second day, Marta was showing Margaret something about the way she'd put up preserves in the old country, and Margaret was showing her a way of drying corn she'd learned from her mother. Henrik watched this and said to me at the end of the second day, "Your woman is good." I said, "I know." He thought about it and said, "You are a lucky man." And I said, "Yes, I know that too. I'll tell you about the night the man came. I'd known it might happen. I didn't know when, but I'd known it was possible, and so I'd kept the rifle in reach, and I'd kept a light habit of sleeping, the way a man learns to when he's been a ranch hand, and then a rancher in country where things can go wrong in the dark. It was early September, a warm night, windows open. I heard the horse in the yard first, and then the boot on the step, and by the time the knock came I was already dressed and had the rifle. I opened the door and he was standing on the porch. Big man, wide through the shoulders, a beard that needed cutting. He looked past me into the house. "Name's Teller," he said. "Looking for a woman, half Apache, comes up to here." He put his hand at about shoulder height. I looked at him. "Heard she might be staying on this place," he said. I said, "Who told you that?" He named someone in town. I'd have a word with that person later. "She's not here," I said. He looked at me, looked past me again. "I'd like to see for myself," he said. "No," I said. He looked at the rifle. I wasn't pointing it at him, just holding it. "She belongs with me," he said. "That's not how that works," I said. He took a breath. He was deciding something. I could see it in the way he held his shoulders, and I was watching his hands. "She's a half-blood runaway," he said. "You want to make a problem over that." I said, "I want you to get back on your horse and ride." He stood there. I said, "I'll say it once more." He looked at me for a long moment, looking for something, I think, maybe looking for the kind of man who'd back down, who'd let him talk his way past, who'd have some doubt in him. He didn't find what he was looking for. He got back on his horse and rode. I stood on the porch until I couldn't hear him anymore. Then I went back inside and put the rifle on the hook and went to the back room where Margaret was standing in the doorway, having heard all of it. She was fully dressed. She'd had the kitchen knife in her hand. She looked at me. I said, "He's gone." She said, "He'll come back." I said, "Maybe. But not tonight." She looked at me for a long moment, And then she crossed the room and put her arms around me, her face against my chest. And I held on to her and felt how still she was, not trembling, not crying, just still. The way a person is when they've been afraid for a long time and have run out of running, and are deciding whether to trust the thing they're leaning against. I held her and didn't say anything. The window was open, and there was a frog somewhere outside, and the lamp was low. After a while she said, into my chest, "You weren't afraid of him." I said I was a little. She pulled back enough to look up at me. I said, but not enough to do anything different. She looked at me the way she sometimes looked at me, that particular looking, seeing. She said, no one has ever stood like that for me. I didn't say anything to that, I just held her. He didn't come back, I don't know why. Maybe he decided I was more trouble than it was worth. Maybe he found something else. I never heard of him again. We married in October, which was Margaret's idea. I would have been content with what we had, and she knew that, and she said that was exactly why she wanted it legal and said in front of people. She said, I want the town to know you chose me. I said, the town already knows. She said, I want them to know you're not ashamed of it. I said, I'm not ashamed of it. She said, I know, that's why I want them to see. That was Margaret. She saw things through a frame that was different from mine, because she needed to think about what people would say and what it meant and what she was owed, and I'd had the luxury of not thinking about those things. I tried to see it her way, and I think by that point I was getting better at it. The ceremony was at the Kowalski place, Henrik and Marta's, because that was where we decided to hold it. It wasn't in town and it wasn't on our land. It was a third place, neutral ground, and that suited both of us. Marta had made food. Henrik had gotten a preacher to come out from Calhoun Station, a young man who was new enough that he didn't have strong opinions about what kind of marriage he should or shouldn't say words over. There were maybe 12 people there. The Kowalski family, a couple of other homestead families who decided that Cole and his woman were good neighbors and that was enough, and old Calhoun the storekeeper, who came because he came to everything. Rupert Baines didn't come. I noticed and I didn't note it. Margaret wore a dress she'd made herself, dark blue cotton with a white collar. She'd done something with her hair that I couldn't have described, but that was beautiful. She stood in front of that young preacher, and she was the straightest thing I'd ever seen, straight back, chin level, eyes forward, calm as a windless morning. When it was over and the preacher had said the words and I'd said mine and she'd said hers, she turned to me, and she put both hands on my chest, flat, like she was checking something, like she was making sure I was real and solid and there. She said quiet just for me, "You are a good man, Harlan Cole." I said, "I've done my best." She said, "I know, I was there for all of it." I want to end this where it ended for me, which was not a single moment but a particular morning about 2 months after the wedding in December, when the snow was back and the world outside was white and still. I'd gotten up early the way I always do, started the fire, put the coffee on. I went outside to check the cattle, and it was the kind of cold that reaches into your lungs and clarifies something, that kind of cold, and the light was just coming over the ridge, and the whole field was blue-white, and the cattle were standing in the steam of their own breathing, and everything was quiet the way it only gets in deep winter. When I came back inside, Margaret was up. She'd added a log to the stove, and she was standing at the window with her coffee, looking out at the yard and the snow, her coat pulled around her over her nightgown, her hair loose. She looked over when I came in and she smiled, not a big smile, just the ordinary one she had in the mornings, the one that was for me and nobody else. I got my coffee and stood beside her and looked out at the same yard. The squash from the seed she'd bought in May had been good, better than anything I'd grown. We'd put up more jars than I'd seen in that pantry in years. Out on the fence line I could see the splice she'd made back in February, just visible under the snow cap on the top rail, neat and permanent, the kind of repair that would last 30 years. I don't know what she was thinking looking out at that yard. I know what I was thinking. I was thinking that I'd spent 6 years making myself into a man who didn't need much and didn't expect much and had made his peace with the shape of that. And then one winter night something had fallen on my porch, and I'd found that everything I thought I'd made my peace with was just waiting, just biding, the whole time. I was thinking about what Henrik had said, that I was a lucky man. I was thinking he was right, and I hadn't always known what luck was, and now I did. Margaret put her hand through my arm and leaned against me slightly, just her shoulder against mine, both of us looking out at the snow and the cattle and the fence line and the ridge going gold in the morning. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. That was enough. That was the whole of it, right there, the quiet of a good morning and a good woman beside me and my own land running out to the horizon in every direction, all of it mine, all of it ours, and the coffee warm in my hand, and not a single thing in the world I needed to prove to anybody anymore.